Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk about why silver and gold are good investments to buy into. But for me to present that to you and for you to understand it, you need to understand other factors first and the bigger picture. So we will be comparing information on this table and we'll be starting from the year 1970 and we'll be comparing it with 1980 up until 2018. And what I'll be doing, I'll be doing this video in stages, in parts, so that it's not one long video, so that it's rather maybe 2 or 3 small videos. And by the end of it, hopefully you would understand why silver and gold are good opportunities to invest your money in, and why holding and saving is actually a bad or not the smartest thing to do. So in this video we're going to start off with the purchasing power equivalence of a pound. And it's important you understand this, what's happening to the pound over the years, before we move on to gold and silver and why they are good opportunities to buy into today. So let's start with the pound. The pound in 1970. So the pound in 1970, because I'm not going to be comparing the pound to any of the years prior, we would say that in 1970, £1 equals £1, £100 equals £100, and so on. So £10,000 equals £10,000 in 1970. Now, if we just look at quickly the average yearly wage in 1970, the average yearly wage was £1,600 a year, and the average London house price back then was £4,848. So it's safe to say in 1970, if you had £10,000 in your bank account as savings in cash, you were pretty well off. Because with that money, you were able to buy at least 2 London houses and much more probably if you looked north outside of London. But we're talking about in London, so you were able to buy at least 2 London houses outright without any mortgage, without any debt, if you had £10,000 in your account. So you were pretty well off and you were wealthy. Now, if we jump 10 years later to 1980, bearing in mind we're just focusing on the purchasing power of a pound. Now, so what happened in 1980 is that prices increased by 260.74% on average than 1970. So everything got higher. The cost of living got higher and so on. And what that basically means is in 1980, £3.61 was equivalent to £1 in 1970 in terms of purchasing power. So the purchasing power of £1 in 1970, to have the same purchasing power ability, you would need at least £3.61 in 1980. So the purchasing power of £100 in 1970 would have been £361 in 1980. £1,000 in 1970, the purchasing power for that effect in 1980 would have been £3,610, and in 1980 you would need at least £36,100 will be the purchasing power for £10,000 in 1970. So bear in mind, imagine you had £10,000 savings in 1970. You held that in your account up until 1980. Now you're in the new decade of 1980. What you would find is that the purchasing power of your £10,000, you would need at least £36,100 in 1980 to have the same purchasing power as you did back in 1970 with your £10,000. So what does that tell you? Did your £10,000 gain increase in purchasing power? Are you able to buy more with your £10,000 that you saved in your account, which you were very rich with in 1970? By the time you reach 1980, are you able to buy more or less? Obviously less, because every pound in 1980 lost 72.28% in purchasing power from 1970. So that means the £10,000 that you now saved from 1970 to 1980, it has the equivalent in purchasing power to £2,770 in 1970. So that's what your £10,000 is worth in purchasing power in 1970. Remember, in 1970, your £10,000 was worth £10,000. But as you move to 1980, because of the 260.74% higher price increase, on average, your pounds lost at least 72.28% in purchasing power from 1970. So your £10,000 in 1980 would have an equivalent purchasing power of £2,770 in 1970. So it's as if your purchasing power of that £10,000 is £2,770 if you were to go back to 1970. So your pound has lost a lot. Now imagine you continued saving that £10,000 up until the year 2018, which would have been just shy of 40 years later. The prices in 2018 was 1,406.97% higher than 1970. So bear that in mind, things have gotten more expensive. Now I'm going to explain to you what's the cause of this inflation. Why are prices rising up? Why are prices increasing? And why is all this happening? But before I explain that to you, what's causing the inflation, I just want to go through this column and show you what inflation is actually doing to your purchasing power of your savings. So now in 2018, that same £10,000 that you had in 1970, firstly, you would need at least £150,700 to have the same equivalence in purchasing power. So in 2018, £15.07 is equal to £1 in 1970. £15.07. So the purchasing power of £15.07 is the same as £1 in 1970 in 2018. So by the time you get to 10,000, you need at least £150,700 in 2018 to have the same purchasing power as £10,000 in 1970. This is because every pound in 2018 lost 93.36% in purchasing power from 1970. So every single pound that you had in 1970, by the time you got to 2018, it nearly lost 94% of its purchasing power. So what that basically means, in 2018, £1 that you saved, that you have, is equal to 7 pence in 1970 in terms of purchasing power. £100 in 2018 is equal to £6.63 in terms of purchasing power in 1970. That's the equivalence. So your £10,000, if you had saved it, the equivalence now of your purchasing power in 1970 would be £663.57. So your £10,000 in 2018 that you saved, its purchasing power equivalent in 1970, which is where you saved it from, would be £663.57. So remember, in 1970, with £10,000, you were able to buy 2 houses. Now, by the time you get to 2018, having saved that £10,000, its equivalence would be £663.57 of 1970. So you won't even be able to buy anything, no houses with that value, its worth. It's because its purchasing power has got less and less over time. The purchasing power of the pound has not increased and got stronger, it's got considerably weaker. So what does this tell you? Would it have been a smart idea for people in 1970 to save cash up until 2018? To focus on saving money? Would that have been a smart idea? Would they have gotten richer? Or would they have found themselves losing everything, getting poorer by the day, by the year, by the month, or whatever? And by the time they get to 2018, their £10,000 would have been equivalent to just £663 purchasing power back in 1970. Now remember, 1970, £10,000 of purchasing power was £10,000. But in 2018, the purchasing power is now £663 because it's lost a lot of value. The pound lost 93.36% in value in the past, all those years, 1970 to 2018, nearly 50 years. So now I'm going to answer the question of what's causing the purchasing power of the pound to be lost over time. Why is this happening? Now, the reason why this is happening is because it is due to inflation. And inflation is the rising of prices, which is a symptom of creating money out of nothing. So prices don't just rise for no reason. The prices are rising because of money, currency, fiat currency is being created out of nothing. So who creates this money? Where is it being created from? So why is the pound losing its purchasing power so badly? The reason why the pound, and it's not just the pound for that matter, it's all fiat currencies. If you do this same analysis with the dollar, you would probably find it's much worse. And the euro, any currency out there, you would find that they are all losing its purchasing power. But for the sake of this video, I've decided to just use the pound as an example. So why is the pound drastically losing its purchasing power over time? Now, this is due to the creation of money out of nothing. And that's what happens. Many people don't understand how money works, where it comes from, what gives it value, why is it losing its value, why are prices going up, why do we have inflations, deflations, recessions. Well, to sum it up, you have to understand how fiat currencies come into existence. They are basically created out of nothing, created out of thin air. Just by the tick of a pen, these large sums of money comes into existence by bankers. As a result of this leads to prices rising, because what happens is that governments borrow money off these bankers because they need it for their spending. So these bankers then create this money out of nothing and lend it to government. And then what the government has to do now is pay back their money that they borrowed, that X sum plus interest. So just to give you a small example, imagine the government borrowed £100. Now these bankers just create £100 out of thin air into existence. Now the government owes the bankers £100 plus interest. So just say £110. Where is that extra £10 coming from? The interest. If you get the money back to pay back the principal, where is that X coming from to pay back the interest? Because all money comes from bankers. So where is the money coming from to pay back the interest? It can only come back from the same source that the money came from originally, and that's from the bankers. So they borrow more money to pay back their debt, and that leads them into more debt plus more interest. So if you see, it's a never-ending cycle of debt and interest that's constantly inflating. It's not going smaller, it's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And more borrowing is done to pay back old debt, which leads to a future bigger debt and more interest that needs to be paid, and so on. So if you look at the UK government alone, the UK government's national debt from borrowing money that is just created out of thin air is currently over £2.1 trillion. The dollar, if you look at the US currency, their national debt is about $22 trillion. So they're doing even worse. This debt has an annual interest that needs to be paid. And for the UK, the annual interest alone on our debt amounts to over £48 billion. So our national debt grows at a rate of £5,170 per second. And that's phenomenal. So all of this money coming into existence, all of this money being created, and what does it do to the economy, the prices? It causes prices to increase. That's what causes inflation. The printing of money. It causes prices to increase, prices to rise, and things to become more expensive. And that's inflation. As a result of that, it causes the pound to lose its purchasing power. So in 1970, a pound could do much more in terms of what it could buy. In 1980, it lost its power by 72.28%. By the time it reached 2018, the pound lost nearly 94% of its purchasing power as a result of inflation, prices rising, which is as a result of money being created out of nothing, out of thin air, just being dumped. So how does the government pay back this debt? We have a debt of £2.1 trillion. So the government tries to pay back this debt through the use of taxes. And then they try to reduce their spending, their deficit, through cutbacks. But it's hopeless at the end of the day. And what just happens is that they end up just printing more money to pay back old debt, because the taxes can never actually cover the amount of debt that they owe, the amount of interest that they need to pay. So what do? They just further inflate the currency supply and increase the national debt by borrowing more money to pay back old debt. And that just makes the currency supply expand, and that just makes the national debt get even bigger. So it is a constantly expanding and unsustainable system which only leads to the devaluation of currency. So it's very important that you understand that, and this is what causes inflation: the printing of the money, the monetary supply, the printing of currency. And every single pound that exists is backed by debt. Every single pound that comes into existence is because it's been borrowed from bankers. It's basically an IOU. We have this money that's been created and it's borrowed from bankers. So the government is in debt to the bankers. They have to pay every single pound back to them plus interest on top. And the interest can only come from the bankers, since money comes from them anyways, which is created out of nothing by private bankers. So once you understand this, then you'll understand why we constantly have these problems where when inflation is getting too high and the pound is losing its purchasing power, the government quickly wants to do cutbacks, and there's a recession, and then we have these austerity measures, and then when there's a deflation, and what happens during these cutbacks? There's lack of funding, people lose employment, the pound prices may shrink when prices start to decrease and there's no employment and there's all these cutbacks and we're going through difficult austerity measures. What happens then? Then they quickly want to boost the system up again by borrowing money and inflating the currency supply. So it's a constant battle of inflation and deflation. But in the end, the only thing that's happening is the debt's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and the pound, even if they try to manipulate it through inflation, deflation, it's just losing its value over time. And another 10 years from now, the pound would have lost even more value. This is why if you're saving money, know that you're saving something that's losing its value by the day. As the debt increases and as the borrowing of money increases, the pound is constantly losing its value. Any fiat currency is losing its value. So saving is for losers, and only losers save. And the reason why it's for losers is because you end up losing your money if you save. If you saved money from 1970 to now, you would have nothing today. £10,000 in 1970, you would have probably been like a millionaire back then with £10,000 in terms of purchasing power. Today, it's worthless if you had saved it. The purchasing power would be like £663. That's how much you would have lost, 93% of its purchasing power. So that's all for this video. In the next video, I'll talk more on the price of gold and the price of silver and how it performed from 1970 to 2018, as well as the price of the London house prices and so on. And by the end of this video, I want you to understand why gold and silver is an amazing opportunity today. Not money, not savings in cash, but having your money in gold and silver, and how it's a hedge against inflation. It protects you from this fiat currency that's losing its value. You can preserve the value of your wealth over time and in the long run. So thank you for watching, and that's all for now. Have a good day. Bye.